This story is titled, Dad Kicked Me Out of the House Forcing Me to Live in a Camper. But later he tries to steal that camper because he wants to go camping, so I call the cops and he is arrested and begging me to drop the charges. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I'm sick of being treated like nothing I own is mine. My dad thought he could take whatever he wanted, but not anymore. What do you think, Reddit? Living under my dad's roof wasn't just tough. It was like living in a constant power struggle. He had this way of making everything about him. If I saved up to buy something, it was only a matter of time before he either took it for himself or acted like I owed him for it. My mom was no help either. She wasn't as controlling, but she always backed him up. She'd tell me, "It's just the way he is." Like that excused everything. For the most part, I managed to put up with it. I worked part-time, saved what I could, and tried to stay out of his way. My goal was simple: get through it and eventually move out. But my dad? He couldn't leave anything alone. The breaking point came when he took the one thing I worked hardest for, my car. That car was my ticket to freedom. It wasn't fancy or new, just an old Chevy Caprice I got for cheap. But I loved it. I spent months fixing it up and poured every spare dollar into making it run well. It wasn't just a car to me, it was independence. My dad, though, had other ideas. He didn't see it as mine. He saw it as something he could use whenever he felt like it. The first time he took it, he didn't even bother asking. I came home from work, and it was just gone. He rolled up a few hours later, acting like it was no big deal. "Borrowed it for a bit," he said casually, like I should have been grateful. I tried to set boundaries after that, telling him he couldn't take it without asking. He didn't take it seriously. A week later, I found the car scratched up after another one of his joyrides. When I confronted him, he brushed it off. "It's an old car," he said. "Stop acting like it's worth something." That was when I started hiding the keys. I thought I was safe until one morning I woke up, and the car was gone again. I'd had enough. I called the cops and reported it stolen. When the cops showed up, my dad went ballistic. He stood there yelling at me in front of the officers. "You called the cops on me? I'm your father." I didn't flinch. "You took my car without permission. That's called stealing, Dad." "It's not stealing if it's family," he shouted back, his voice cracking. The cops didn't arrest him, but they made him return the car. To him, though, it wasn't about the car. It was about the fact that I stood up to him. For days after, he sulked around the house, muttering under his breath about how ungrateful I was. Then one night, he called me into the living room. "You're done here," he said coldly. "You call the cops on me? After everything I've done for you? You've got 2 weeks to pack your stuff and leave." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You're kicking me out because you stole my car?" He didn't even blink. "My house, my rules. If you don't like it, there's the door." My mom just sat there, not saying a word. She wouldn't even look at me. By the time my dad kicked me out, I'd already been working full-time for a few months. I wasn't making a fortune, but I'd saved enough to start thinking about my options. I didn't have enough for an apartment, and I wasn't about to couch surf indefinitely. That's when the idea of buying a camper hit me. It wasn't a luxury, but it could be my own space. No landlords, no roommates, and most importantly, no parents. After some late-night scrolling on classified ads, I found one that seemed promising. I figured it was my best shot at having some stability. After meeting the seller, checking it out, and haggling a bit, I handed over most of my savings and towed the camper to my uncle's property. With nowhere to go, I turned to the only family member who ever had my back, my uncle. He's always been the odd one out, the guy who didn't put up with my dad's crap. When I told him what happened, he didn't even hesitate. "You can park that camper of yours in my yard," he said. "Stay as long as you need to. Just keep the lawn mowed and don't burn the place down." It wasn't ideal, but it was better than dealing with my dad. The camper wasn't much, but it was enough. But my dad? He couldn't leave it alone. The moment he found out I was living in a camper, it was like a switch flipped. He wasn't satisfied with kicking me out. Now he wanted to take the one thing I had left. Of course, my dad couldn't let me have even that. The moment he found out about my setup, he started acting like it was a crime for me to own a camper. "You're living like some kind of drifter," he said, with his usual sneer. What he really meant was, "Why do you have one, and I don't?" Then one day, he showed up at my uncle's house out of nowhere with my mother, which was already weird because he and my uncle don't get along at all. My uncle's always been treated like the black sheep of the family, and honestly, he's pretty open about how much he can't stand my dad. Anyway, my dad pulls up in his car, gets out, and goes straight to my camper without even saying hi. I step outside, and he's just standing there, looking at my trailer like he's inspecting it. "Nice setup you got here," he says, but it's not a compliment. It's that passive-aggressive tone he always uses when he's about to start something. "Yeah, it's working for me," I reply, trying to keep it casual. "I've always wanted a camper like this. Would be perfect for some camping trips. You know, me and your mom have been talking about getting into that." Then he casually says, "So, I'm gonna take it camping this summer." And that was the beginning of the whole mess. I laughed, thinking they couldn't possibly be serious. No. This is my home. I'm not letting you borrow it." My dad's face immediately changed. "What do you mean, no? I'm your father. I shouldn't have to ask you to borrow something like this." "Well, you don't have to ask," I said, trying to keep my tone light, "because the answer's no." That's when my mom started in with the guilt trip. "We're your parents. We raised you, and all we're asking for is a little favor." I was getting pissed now. "You didn't raise me so you could take my stuff whenever you feel like it. This is my home. I'm not just going to let you tow it off and use it like it's yours." My dad, of course, wasn't going to let it go. He started pacing, muttering about how ungrateful I was, and how he couldn't believe his own son would treat him like this. My mom just stood there, shaking her head like I'd betrayed them or something. "Look," I said, trying to end the conversation, "this isn't up for debate. You're not taking the trailer. End of story." They eventually left, but not before my dad got in one last dig. "You've changed," he said, shaking his head. "I don't know what happened to you." Yeah, I had changed, but wasn't it because of them? Years of being manipulated, dismissed, and treated like nothing I owned was ever truly mine. It all built up. He couldn't see it, of course. I was the person they'd created with all their entitlement and selfishness. If that made me the villain in his eyes, so be it. After that, I thought things would calm down, but I was dead wrong. My dad started calling me almost every day, bringing up the trailer like we hadn't already had this conversation. "You're being selfish," he'd say. "What are you even using it for? You don't need all that space." I stopped answering his calls after a while, but then my mom started texting me. "Your father is really upset. Why can't you just let him use it? It's not like you're doing anything important with it." It wasn't about the trailer, though. It was about control. My dad couldn't stand the idea of me having something he wanted, but couldn't have. And the more I said no, the more determined he got to wear me down. My uncle, bless his heart, was on my side the whole time. "Don't give in," he said one night, while we were grilling burgers in the backyard. "If you let him take it once, he'll never give it back." "I know," I said, flipping a burger. "That's why I'm standing my ground." My uncle nodded. "Good. And if he shows up here again, I'll handle it. This is my property, and he doesn't get to call the shots here." I felt a little better knowing my uncle had my back, but I also knew my dad well enough to know he wasn't going to give up. He'd find another way to get what he wanted. He always did. Sure enough, a couple of weeks later, I woke up to the sound of someone messing around outside the trailer. It was late, probably around midnight, and I could see the faint glow of a flashlight moving around. My heart started pounding as I got out of bed and peeked out the window. There he was, my dad, crouched down by the hitch like he was trying to hook the trailer up to his car. I couldn't believe it. He was actually trying to steal the damn thing. I threw on some clothes and stormed outside, yelling, "What the hell are you doing?" He froze for a second, then stood up and tried to play it off. "Oh, I was just checking something," he said, like I was stupid enough to believe him. "Checking what?" I snapped. "How to steal my trailer." He started getting defensive, with his usual borrowing it. I wasn't having any of it. "You're not borrowing anything," I said. "Get out of here before I call the cops." He tried to argue, but I wasn't budging. Eventually, he stormed off, muttering about how ungrateful I was, and how I'd regret treating him like this. The next morning, I went full lockdown mode. I bought heavy-duty locks, installed motion sensor lights, and even got a cheap security camera off Amazon. If my dad wanted the trailer, he was going to need a crowbar and a lot of nerve to get it. That was the first real fight over the trailer. But it definitely wasn't the last. I knew my dad well enough to know he wasn't going to let this go. He was stubborn, and when he wanted something, he didn't stop until he either got it or burned every bridge in the process. And me? I wasn't about to back down. This was my home, my safe space, and I wasn't letting anyone take that away from me, especially not him. After the whole midnight sabotage thing, I thought I'd seen the worst of my dad's obsession with the trailer. But nope, he wasn't done. He decided to bring in reinforcements, the rest of the family. And let me tell you, my extended family is like a pack of gossip-loving, drama-fueled chaos machine. If there's something to argue about, they'll find a way to make it worse. It started with my mom. She called me the next day and went straight into her guilt trip routine. You know, your father was just trying to do something nice for us, she said, her voice all sweet and fake. He's been under so much stress lately, and a camping trip would really help him unwind. Why do you have to be so difficult? I just laughed. Mom, he tried to steal my trailer in the middle of the night. That's not doing something nice, that's being a psycho. Oh, stop being so dramatic, she said. You're overreacting. Right, because apparently standing up for myself is overreacting. I told her I wasn't interested in hearing it and hung up, but that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, one of my cousins called me out of the blue. Hey, they said, trying to sound casual. So, I heard about the whole trailer thing. What's going on? What's going on? I replied, already annoyed. Is that my dad thinks he can take my stuff whenever he wants, and I'm not letting him. My cousin made this little noise, like they were considering both sides of the argument. Well, I mean, he is your dad. Don't you think you should let him borrow it? I felt my blood pressure spike. First of all, it's my home. Second, even if I wasn't living in it, that doesn't mean he can just take it. Why is everyone acting like I'm the bad guy here? Relax, man, they said, laughing like it was no big deal. I'm just saying, maybe you should think about it. He's your dad, after all. That's when I realized my dad had probably been calling everyone in the family like the golden child he is, spinning some sob story about how I was a selfish jerk who refused to help out his poor, hardworking parents. It was classic him, making himself the victim and turning everyone else against me. But I wasn't about to play along. The real showdown came at a family reunion a couple of weeks later. By that time, I was fully settled into living in my uncle's backyard with the camper, and life was starting to feel normal again. My uncle, who genuinely enjoyed having me around, decided to host the reunion on his property that year. When he suggested I park the trailer near the edge of the property during the reunion, I figured it wasn't a bad idea. It gave me my own space and spared me from having to share a room with anyone, especially my parents. Plus, it was a chance to show off all the work I'd done on the camper. When I pulled the trailer to its spot and got everything set up, things seemed fine. I built a fire pit, fired up the grill, and even had a few laughs with cousins I hadn't seen in a while. For a moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, this family gathering would go smoothly. But then my dad showed up and everything went to hell. He didn't even say hello. He just marched over to where I was sitting and started in on me. You really brought the trailer here? He said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You couldn't let your old man borrow it? But you'll drag it out here to show it off? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. It's my trailer, Dad. I can do what I want with it. Unbelievable, he said, throwing his hands up. You don't care about family at all, do you? All we wanted was one little favor, and you couldn't even do that. At this point, a few other relatives had started gathering around, pretending to be interested in the food, but clearly eavesdropping. My mom jumped in, of course, because she can never resist making things worse. Do you see what we're dealing with? She said, shaking her head. We've done everything for him, and this is the thanks we get. I lost it. Everything for me? You stole my car, tried to steal my trailer, and now you're turning the whole family against me because I won't let you walk all over me. Yeah, great parenting, guys. The crowd went silent for a moment, and then one of my cousins, bless her, stepped up. Honestly, he's right, she said, crossing her arms. You two have been treating him like crap for years. Maybe it's time you stopped. My dad's face turned bright red, and my mom looked like she'd just been slapped. They stormed off, muttering about how no one in the family respected them anymore. A few days after the reunion, I came home to find my trailer covered in mud, like someone had driven a truck through the yard and splashed mud all over the sides. And I noticed the tire tracks leading directly to the trailer and stopping right in front of it. I called my uncle to ask if he'd seen anything, and he just laughed. Yeah, your dad came by earlier. He was ranting about how you embarrassed him at the reunion. I figured he'd try something stupid. Why didn't you stop him? I asked. I was busy watching from the window, he said. Don't worry, though. I've got it on camera. Turns out my uncle had installed a security camera a while back and caught the whole thing. My dad pulling into the yard, revving his engine, and spinning his tires in the mud like some kind of middle-aged teenager. I was pissed, but honestly, I couldn't stop laughing at how pathetic it was. After that, I put up a fake security sign that said, "Surveillance in progress." My uncle thought it was hilarious, but also agreed it was probably necessary. With everything my father is doing, I wasn't taking any chances. I decided to move the trailer closer to my uncle's house, just in case he tried something else. My uncle, always looking out for me, thought we could take it a step further. He offered to help me install a GPS tracker on it, which seemed a little extreme, but honestly, I was tempted. He showed me a GPS tracker he'd ordered online. This thing's waterproof, he explained, and it'll send an alert to your phone if the trailer moves more than a few feet. The next afternoon, we installed the tracker underneath the trailer and tested it out. It worked like a charm. My trailer was basically a fortress. The funny thing is, My dad never actually apologized for any of it. In his mind, he was completely justified. I thought the mud stunt was as low as my dad could go, but apparently he still had a few tricks up his sleeve. After I locked down the trailer with heavy-duty locks and motion sensor lights, things were quiet for a while. Too quiet. It felt like the calm before the storm. And, well, I was right. About 2 weeks later, I came home from running errands to find my uncle pacing the yard with his phone in hand, looking more pissed off than I'd ever seen him. "What's going on?" I asked as I got out of my car. "You'll never guess who showed up here while you were gone," he said. I already knew the answer. "Let me guess, Dad?" "Yup," my uncle said, shaking his head. And this time, he brought a tow truck. I froze for a second. "Are you serious? A freaking tow truck?" "Oh, I'm serious," my uncle said, his voice dripping with anger. He tried to tow the trailer right off the property, told the driver some BS about it being his, and that you'd given him permission to take it. At this point, I was seeing red. "What did you do?" "I went outside with my shotgun," my uncle said, matter-of-factly. "Didn't have to use it, of course." The tow truck guy wanted no part of it and left as soon as I told him what was really going on. Your dad, on the other hand, started yelling about how I was a traitor and how this whole family's against him. Classic dad. Whenever he doesn't get his way, it's always someone else's fault. By the time I'd unloaded my groceries and gone inside, I was still fuming. I knew I had to deal with this head-on, or it would never stop. So I called him. "Hey, Dad," I said, barely holding back my anger. "Care to explain why you showed up at Uncle's house with a tow truck today?" "Oh, don't start with me," he snapped. "You should have just let me have the trailer. I wouldn't have to go through all this if you weren't being so damn selfish." "Selfish?" I laughed, though it wasn't a happy laugh. "You tried to steal my home, and I'm the selfish one? Are you even hearing yourself?" "It's not stealing anything," he said, like that made it okay. "Besides, you're not even using it for anything important. You could live somewhere else if you really wanted to." This wasn't the first time he'd tried to act like my trailer didn't matter, but it still got under my skin. "You don't get to decide what's important to me," I said. "And for the last time, you're not taking the trailer. If you show up here again, I'm calling the cops. I don't care if you're my dad." He didn't have much to say after that, and eventually he hung up on me. After the call, I sat there for a while, trying to cool down, but it wasn't working. No matter how many times I told him to stop, he just didn't get it. Or worse, didn't care. That evening, my uncle was sitting on the porch. I flopped down into the chair next to him and told him about the call. "I swear your dad's got more energy for drama than a reality TV star." Then he added, "You know, I've got half a mind to call him up and tell him he's banned from the property. Not like he'd listen, but it'd be fun to watch him lose his mind. Maybe that's not a bad idea. At least it'd send a message, even if it does trigger his narcissistic nerve." My uncle grinned. "Oh, it'll trigger him, all right. But some people need to hear it straight. Let me know if you're in, and I'll make the call." After my uncle banned my dad from his property, I thought things might finally calm down. My uncle made it clear that my dad wasn't welcome anywhere near the trailer. For a while, it seemed like my dad had gotten the message. No calls, no surprise visits, no new drama. It was almost too good to be true. And of course, it was. I'll keep you updated if anything else happens, because with him, you never know. Update. Alright, so this is the follow-up to my last post, where my uncle banned my dad from his property after all the crap he pulled. Well, because my dad wasn't done. Somehow he managed to outdo himself. And this time, he went all the way. He stole the camper. That's right. He actually took it while I was out of town. Here's how it went down. So I had to go out of town for work. Nothing big, just a couple of days, and I made sure everything was locked down tight before I left. I even asked my uncle to keep an eye on the camper while I was gone. I wasn't too worried because, let's be real, I thought my dad wouldn't have the balls to try anything after getting banned. Boy, was I wrong. The first night I'm away, I get an alert on my phone from the GPS tracker app. Movement detected. Trailer is on the move. At first, I thought maybe it was a glitch or something. But when I opened the app and saw that my trailer was heading down the highway, I knew. My dad. It had to be him. I called my uncle immediately. "Hey, did you move the camper or something?" "No," he said, sounding confused. "Why?" "Because it's gone!" I yelled. "The GPS says it's halfway to town." I swear I heard him slam his coffee mug down. That son of a bitch, he must have stolen it. Turns out, my dad had swiped a spare set of keys weeks ago without me realizing it. He'd been playing the long game, waiting for me to be gone so he could swoop in and take what he thought was rightfully his. Uncle didn't even hesitate. "Call the cops. I'll meet you there." I called 911, and let me tell you, trying to explain that your dad stole your camper isn't as straightforward as you'd think. The dispatcher was super chill, though. She asked for proof of ownership, and I told her I had the title and GPS logs to prove it. Do you know the suspect? She asked. Yeah, I said, feeling my blood boil. It's my dad. There was a pause, like she needed a second to process that. Okay, we'll send officers to intercept the trailer. Please don't confront him yourself. Yeah, like I was gonna let that slide. I called my uncle back and told him where the GPS said the camper was headed. He picked me up, and we started tracking it ourselves. We followed the GPS signal for what felt like forever. My heart was pounding, and my uncle kept muttering stuff like, I can't believe the nerve of that man. Finally, we caught up. There it was, my dad's car, towing my camper down a back road like he'd just bought the damn thing. Uncle wanted to pull up and block him in, but I told him to hold off. The cops weren't far behind, and I wasn't about to risk escalating things myself. Sure enough, a couple of minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights came speeding past us. They stopped my dad just as he was pulling into his driveway. He looked so smug, like he'd just pulled off the heist of the century. We pulled up behind the cops, and I hopped out of the truck. My dad was already arguing with the officers. It's my son's trailer, he was saying, waving his hands around like a lunatic. You took it without asking. From a property you were banned from? And you think that's borrowing? The officer raised a hand to stop me from getting too close. Sir, do you have proof of ownership for this trailer? I handed over the title and showed them the GPS logs. It's mine. He stole it. The officer turned to my dad. Do you have any proof of ownership or permission to use this trailer? My dad stammered, his face getting redder by the second. It's a family trailer. I'm his father. That gives me the right to use it. The officer didn't look impressed. Sir, without proof of ownership or explicit permission, this is considered theft. Please step away from the vehicle. When they pulled out the cuffs, my dad lost his mind. You're really arresting me for borrowing a trailer from my own son? He shouted. Yes, sir, the officer said calmly. You're ruining the family, he yelled at me as they cuffed him. I raised you. I gave you everything. And this is how you treat me? My mom came running out of the house just as they were loading him into the patrol car. What's going on? Why are you arresting him? She screamed. The officer explained the situation, and she immediately turned on me. How could you do this to your father? He didn't mean any harm. No, Mom, I said, my voice firm. He meant to take what wasn't his, and I'm done letting him do that. After the arrest, the calls started pouring in. My mom, aunts, cousins, everyone wanted me to drop the charges. He didn't mean to hurt you, my mom sobbed over the phone. You don't understand what this is doing to him. No, Mom, I said, my voice steady. I understand exactly what this is doing to him. For once in his life, he's facing the consequences of his actions. But he's your father, she cried. And I'm his son, not his property, I snapped. I'm not dropping the charges. She hung up on me, and I haven't heard from her since. In the end, my dad pleaded guilty to avoid jail time. He had to pay a hefty fine and restitution, he begged. The family begged. But you know what? I'm done with them. I've officially cut my dad off. No more contact. I've saved up enough, and now I'm taking my camper, hitting the road, and leaving this town behind for good. Whether I settle somewhere new or just keep moving, I'll finally have the peace and freedom I've been fighting for. If my family wants to call me selfish for protecting myself, so be it. I'm not looking back.